Careful, Ryan Caldwell said, flicking the edge of my desk with one finger. Those boxes tear easily. Would be a shame if your career spilled all over the floor. I kept packing. Didn't look up. He stepped closer, too close enough for his cologne to announce itself before he did. Sharp, expensive, pointless. You know what I find fascinating, he went on. 20 years in one office, and it all fits into a single box. Kinda confirms what I suspected. I slid my framed photo face down into the cardboard. Ryan laughed. I mean, honestly, if you were that important, there'd be more stuff. Write more. Impact. One small note before we go further. Parts of this story are fictionalized and enhanced with AI to highlight deeper workplace lessons. If this feels heavy today, it's okay to step away and rest. Your well-being comes first. Ryan Caldwell, Vice President of Strategic Renewal, 27, the CEO's nephew, a title minted over a weekend and handed to him like a spare key. He hadn't earned the room. He'd inherited it. I was Eden Brooks, Senior Client Operations Director. 20 years of fixing messes executives pretended never happened. I didn't sell vision. I handled consequences. Quietly. HR arrived right on cue. Tina Alvarez read from the page without meeting my eyes. Effective immediately. This is an organizational realignment. Eden Brooks is reassigned to a senior advisor role. Non-executive. No decision authority. Advisor. Corporate for sit down and be quiet. Ryan leaned back against my desk. My desk crossed his arms. Think of it as a graceful fade-out. He said, You've had a good run, but we're moving fast now. Speed, innovation, not maintenance. Maintenance. That's what he called keeping clients from walking. Every major account had my number saved. Not the company's, mine. When deals stalled, when regulators sniffed around, they called me. Ryan had never closed a contract in his life. I taped the box shut and finally looked at him. Who's handling Monroe Group now? Silence hit the room. Tina stared at the carpet. Ryan's smile cracked just for a second. No one answered. I took my coat. I didn't take files. I didn't take documents. I didn't take anything they could argue over later. I took my phone. The office was never the point. Do something small before we go untidy one quiet corner of your room. Just enough to make it feel lighter. Tell me where you're listening from. And if stories like this speak to you, stay with me and subscribe. Because what happened next didn't make noise, but it changed everything. Ryan Caldwell called it a town hall, but it felt more like a victory lap. He stood under the company logo, sleeves rolled up, smiling as if he'd personally built the building behind him. I sat 3 rows back. Unintroduced. Unacknowledged. Already rewritten. We're simplifying the structure, he announced. Some roles were designed for a slower era. Legacy structures. He paused, then glanced in my direction just long enough. The room followed his eyes. Legacy. That was his word for me. I didn't react. I let the silence do the work. Inside. Something tightened. I thought about the nights my phone rang after midnight. Clients whispering panic because deals were unraveling. I remembered standing between angry partners and a distracted CEO, apologizing for decisions I hadn't made. I remembered contracts saved not by policy, but by trust, because someone on the other end believed I would fix it. Ryan had never taken those calls. The town hall ended with applause that sounded forced. An hour later, his first email as vice president landed in every inbox. It was polished, confident, and instructional. He told our clients how things would move faster now, how clarity would replace old processes, how leadership meant direction. I read it once. Then again, it spoke at them, not to them. By the afternoon, HR called me in. Tina slid a document across the table. Careful with her words, I was instructed not to contact clients for 90 days. Standard cooling off, she said. The clause was vague, no enforcement language, no penalties, just enough to sound firm. I nodded and signed nothing. They never said clients couldn't contact me. That evening, I left the building quietly. No farewell emails, no speeches, just distance. My phone buzzed as I reached the parking lot. A single message lit the screen. Heard you moved. Call me when you have a moment. Charles Monroe, largest client representative. I stared at it longer than I should have. Ryan thought he'd erased me with a smile. What he didn't understand was simple. Trust doesn't transfer with titles. I didn't call Charles Monroe back. Not right away. I let the phone sit on my kitchen counter, screen dark, like it had nothing urgent to say. Silence wasn't avoidance. It was observation. I wanted to see what the company would do without me moving a single piece. By Tuesday morning, Ryan was already trying to fill the gap with volume. He emailed Monroe Group twice before noon. He followed up with a calendar invite labeled Strategic Alignment. Then he tried calling. I know because his assistant asked if I had a better number. I didn't answer that either. By lunch, the calls stopped. That afternoon, my phone buzzed again. Then again. 2 different numbers. 2 different companies. The same question. Are you still there? No accusations. No panic. Just a check-in. Like people knocking softly on a door they didn't want to break. I didn't reply. Not yet. This wasn't a boycott. It wasn't rebellion. It was something far more dangerous. Waiting. Clients don't pull contracts without warning. They pause. They watch. They measure who still shows up when the structure changes. Loyalty, I'd learned, was quiet. And silence didn't mean agreement. It meant evaluation. Ryan responded the only way he knew how. He talked more. Another internal memo went out about momentum and confidence. Another leadership email, louder than the last. He CC'd half the executive team and none of the people who actually mattered. Inside the company, people began adjusting in small ways. Meetings were postponed. Decisions were under review. No one said my name, but no one replaced it either. That kind of absence has weight. It bends behavior without announcing itself. I imagined Monroe reading Ryan's email, expressionless, deciding nothing. That evening, I drove past the office without stopping. The lights were still on in the corner suite, Ryan's new office. He was probably rehearsing certainty in front of a mirror, mistaking noise for control. I slept well that night, not because I felt safe, but because I finally understood the shape of what was coming, and I was ready for it. The next morning, I ran into Linda Park near the elevators. She slowed when she saw me. Legal instincts already calculating risk. Quick question, she said, lowering her voice. Did we ever update the continuity risk disclosures? I looked at her for a second, long enough for the answer to land before I said it. No, I replied. We never had to. She nodded once, not relieved, not alarmed, just aware. I walked away knowing exactly what was happening. The system had already started shifting. Ryan thought silence meant loyalty. He thought no pushback meant acceptance. He was wrong. Silence meant preparation, always, by midweek. The tone changed. Ryan stopped smiling in meetings. Deals weren't dying, they were being postponed. That polite corporate word that means someone powerful has stopped returning your calls. No explanations followed, no objections, just calendar holds quietly disappearing. He tried filling the silence with optimism. These things happen, he said in one leadership meeting, tapping his tablet too hard. It's just timing. But his voice rose at the end, like a question asking the room to reassure him. They didn't. By Thursday afternoon, the CEO noticed. Martin Caldwell called me into his office, the same one where I'd once cleaned up 3 near lawsuits in a single quarter. He didn't waste time. Eden, Ryan could use some support. He said carefully, just help with a soft transition. Continuity matters. I almost laughed. Almost, of course. I said instead, I've always believed in continuity. He spoke like a man trying to smooth water that was already moving. I listened, nodded, and said nothing about the clients who hadn't asked for Ryan's vision. They wanted reassurance, not speeches. Martin didn't ask what they were saying. He didn't want answers, just stability, in that moment. I understood my role wasn't to intervene loudly, but to let the absence speak for itself. One unanswered call at a time. Patience was my only leverage. and I plan to use every quiet minute that followed closely. Martin nodded, relieved. He heard cooperation. What I meant was memory. After that, Ryan started CCing me on emails he didn't understand. He asked for background on clients who refused to give it to him directly. Every message carried a subtle panic, wrapped in corporate politeness, looping Eden for context. He wrote, as if context were something you could forward. I watched the situation tighten without touching it. Another deal slipped to pending review. Then another. No one explained why. No one complained. Silence did all the work. It was almost elegant. Ryan tried humor to cover it. Guess they're just shy. He joked during a call that ended 5 minutes early. No one laughed. That night, I opened my calendar and did something simple. I scheduled a private meeting with Charles Monroe. No company logo, no conference room, just coffee, off-site. I didn't list myself as senior advisor. I didn't list a title at all. I wrote former contact, because that's what I was now. Not inside, not outside. Something more inconvenient. Ryan thought continuity meant keeping the seat warm. He didn't understand that continuity lives with the people clients trust, not the roles companies assign. By the time he realized the calls weren't coming back, I was already on my way to the meeting he didn't know existed. At this point, many people think they can predict the story they're usually wrong. I met Charles Monroe on a quiet Thursday morning, not in a boardroom, but at a small cafe he always preferred, because no one talked too loudly there. He shook my hand the same way he always had, firm, familiar, unhurried. No small talk, no sympathy. I'll be direct, he said after we sat down. We don't know the new kid, we know you. That was it. No drama, just a fact. Stated like gravity. I nodded. I figured as much. Monroe leaned back. Your company keeps sending emails, vision statements, timelines, promises. They're very confident. He paused, letting the word lose its shine. But confidence isn't continuity. That sentence landed heavier than any accusation. I didn't interrupt. I'd learned long ago that real power speaks slowly. He slid a folder across the table, not to give me, just to point at. In the contract we're about to sign, he said. There's language you probably remember. Continuity language. I did remember. I'd helped write it years ago, back when we were fixing problems instead of renaming them. It doesn't list a name. Monroe continued. It lists a responsible individual, someone accountable, someone we trust. And if that person leaves the pipeline, I asked. Monroe smiled. Not kindly, but honestly. Then we wait. Indefinitely. If needed. I took a breath. Not relief. Recognition. People think power lives in titles, offices, or org charts. It doesn't. Power lives in risk tolerance, who absorbs it, who understands it, and who others believe can manage it when things go wrong. I'd carried that weight for 20 years without ever advertising it. Monroe watched me closely. We're not trying to punish anyone, he said. We're protecting ourselves. I understand. I replied. And I meant it. There was a time I might have argued for the company, pushed for reassurance, smoothed things over. That was my old role. This time, I didn't offer anything they hadn't earned. Monroe closed the folder. We're not pulling out, he said. We're waiting. When I walked out of the cafe, the air felt different, not lighter, clearer. Ryan still had the office, the title, the emails, but the timeline had shifted, and it wasn't his anymore. Continuity. I realized, isn't something you assign, it's something people decide, and once that decision is made, no amount of confidence can replace it. I didn't call anyone after that meeting. I didn't need to. The balance had already moved, quietly and permanently. What Ryan mistook for hesitation was actually structure doing what it was designed to do. Systems don't shout when they work, they hold. And right then, they were holding everything in place, waiting for the right hands to return. Pressure doesn't arrive loudly at first. It shifts rooms, changes tone, and starts asking questions no one prepared answers for. By the end of the week, Legal stopped pretending everything was fine. Linda Park scheduled an emergency review and used a phrase no executive likes to hear: continuity risk. Not theoretical, not long-term, immediate. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The words carried weight on their own. Ryan reacted exactly as expected. "They can't dictate who we employ," he snapped during the call. "That sets a dangerous precedent." He spoke like authority came from volume. It doesn't. It comes from leverage. The board listened without interrupting. Then one director asked the only question that mattered. "Then, why aren't they signing?" No one answered right away. Ryan tried again. He talked about vision, momentum, and alignment. He blamed timing. He blamed market conditions. He blamed anything that didn't look back at him from the screen. Each explanation sounded reasonable until placed next to silence. Silence wins every comparison. I watched from the side. Officially, an advisor. Unofficially, the reference point no one named. Meetings began circling my old decisions without acknowledging them. Documents resurfaced. Emails from years ago were suddenly relevant again. History has a way of reclaiming its seat when people forget why it was written. The pressure flipped direction. Instead of clients justifying delay, leadership started justifying decisions. Ryan felt it. His emails grew sharper. His meetings ran longer. He started asking legal questions he should have asked months earlier. Martin Caldwell stayed quiet through most of it. When he spoke, it was careful. "We need stability," he said. "We can't afford uncertainty right now." He didn't look at Ryan when he said it. Late Friday afternoon, the email arrived. It came from Monroe Group, short, polite, precise, and copied to the entire board. "We'd like Eden Brooks present for the next discussion. No accusations, no demands, just a condition." The room went still. Ryan stared at the screen like it had betrayed him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing to argue. This wasn't about fairness or ego. It was about risk, and everyone in that room understood the language. Martin leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and nodded once. Not approval, acceptance. That was the moment the balance shifted. Titles stopped mattering. Noise lost its effect. The system recalibrated itself around the person it trusted to hold it together. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The board had started asking questions, and the answers were no longer pointing at Ryan. Power rarely announces itself when it moves. It simply changes where decisions land and who others look to when uncertainty appears. I had felt that shift before, many years earlier, and I recognized it now, returning quietly, without asking permission, exactly the same way it had first arrived. "If you think you've seen everything, stay with me for one more part." Ryan didn't retreat. He doubled down. By Monday morning, he scheduled a critical alignment call with Monroe Group and every executive who still answered his calendar invites. Large screen, perfect lighting, slides packed with arrows, timelines, and words that sounded decisive if you didn't stop to examine them too closely. I joined silently, listed as an observer. Ryan spoke fast. He talked about acceleration, scalability, and leverage. He explained frameworks no one had asked for. Every slide promised control. None explained responsibility. Watching him, I realized something uncomfortable, but true confidence can be rehearsed. Judgment cannot. Halfway through, Charles Monroe raised a hand. "This is all very impressive," he said calmly. "But I have a simple question. Who's accountable if this fails?" The room froze. Ryan didn't hesitate. "I am," he said, strong, immediate, final. Monroe didn't respond right away. He looked down, then back up, as if weighing something invisible. The silence stretched long enough to become heavy. "That's the problem," Monroe said at last. Ryan stiffened. "I don't follow." Monroe leaned closer to his camera. "You're confident," he said. "But confidence isn't accountability. Accountability is knowing the system well enough to absorb risk when it shows up. You don't yet." Ryan tried to recover. He talked about leadership growth and support structures. He gestured to legal, to operations, to process. He spoke like someone building a safety net out of other people. Monroe listened without interruption. When Ryan finished, Monroe nodded once. "We'll reconvene," he said. "When Eden is available." The call ended. No debate. No negotiation. Just a closed window and a decision that couldn't be appealed. Ryan stayed frozen, staring at the blank screen like it might change its mind. No one spoke, not legal, not the board. Even Martin said nothing. The absence of defense said more than any argument. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exposed. This was the collision point where performance meets reality, where titles stop protecting people. I'd spent years preventing moments like this quietly. Now the system was teaching the lesson on its own. Ryan had pushed back as hard as he could. He brought slides to a trust problem. He brought language to a judgment gap. And when the question turned from vision to accountability, the room instinctively looked past him. That's when I understood the shift was complete. Power hadn't moved because I demanded it. It moved because others recognized where it already lived. And once that recognition happens, resistance becomes irrelevant. Ryan thought pushing harder would restore control. He didn't see that control had already changed hands. And this time, there was nowhere left to push. The call came the next morning, earlier than usual, which told me everything before anyone spoke. Martin's voice was careful, practiced. The tone leaders use when they're trying to sound generous while correcting a mistake. "Eden," he said, "we'd like you back in a senior advisor capacity. Same title, expanded access. We just need your presence to stabilize things." I smiled to myself. Not because it was funny, but because it was predictable. They always come back to the same language. Advisor, presence, stabilize. Words that sound like action without actually committing to any. "That title won't help you," I replied. Gently, not defiant, just honest. There was a pause. Then Martin cleared his throat. "What would I?" Leaned back and looked out the window, giving myself a moment to choose clarity over resentment. "If you want continuity," I said, "then call it what it is. External continuity consultant, fixed scope, fixed term, independent authority, clear boundaries." Silence again. But this one felt different, calculating. I continued. "Because stopping early is how people misunderstand you. I won't manage teams. I won't carry titles. I'll attend the discussions that matter. Advise on risk. And ensure transitions don't break client trust. When the term ends, it ends cleanly." Martin asked about optics, about precedent, about Ryan. "Ryan can keep his title," I said, "but he can't sit in the pipeline, not yet." That part landed. The board meeting that followed didn't include me, but I didn't need to be there. I could hear the shift through the questions that came back. Duration, authority, reporting lines, insurance coverage. This wasn't a favor, it was a contract. Every clause tightened the boundaries Ryan had assumed were flexible. By the afternoon, the answer arrived. The board approved the arrangement unanimously. External, temporary, defined. And Ryan was removed from all client-facing discussions tied to Monroe Group and any related accounts. Officially, it was framed as focus. Internally, everyone understood what it was. When Martin called back, his voice was steadier. "We'll move forward on your terms." I agreed. Calmly. I didn't feel victorious. I felt settled. The satisfaction wasn't loud. It was precise. I hadn't reclaimed an office or a title. I'd redefined the terms of engagement in a way the system respected. Ryan never called me. He didn't have to. The message had already been delivered, not by me, but by the structure he underestimated. They thought offering me back a chair would solve the problem. They learned instead that continuity doesn't sit in seats. It operates on trust, and trust answers only to clarity. That was the moment I stopped being inside the story and became the condition it depended on. Shaping outcomes quietly, deliberately, and without needing anyone's permission ever again. Especially from those who mistook hierarchy for leadership, authority, or relevance in moments that demand responsibility. And from that point forward, every decision flowed through systems that remembered exactly who had earned their confidence. Permanently, the deal was signed on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning companies like to remember. I was in the room, seated slightly away from the center, exactly where an external consultant belongs. No spotlight, no announcement, just presence. The signatures moved across the table with practiced confidence, and no one hesitated. What struck me wasn't who was there, it was who wasn't. Ryan Caldwell's chair remained empty. His name didn't appear on the agenda. When the press release went out an hour later, it listed leadership, partners, and advisors. I read it once. Slowly, Ryan's title was absent, as if it had never existed. Inside the company, the story shifted quietly. No accusations, no confrontation, just a phrase whispered between departments and forwarded without attribution: nepotism risk. It appeared in meeting notes, risk summaries, and internal reviews, not as blame, but as exposure. A vulnerability identified after damage had already been prevented. Justice, I've learned, rarely announces itself. It settles. Ryan was reassigned the following week. The email was short and carefully worded. He was being moved to internal initiatives, a role designed to sound important while removing all points of friction. No clients, no negotiations, no decisions that carried consequence. A hallway without doors. I saw him once after that, passing through the lobby with a phone pressed to his ear. Still talking, still explaining. No one slowed to listen. Authority had evaporated, not through humiliation, but through irrelevance. The deal closed smoothly. Follow-up calls were calm, trust stabilized. No one thanked me publicly, and that was fine. This wasn't about recognition, it was about correction. I thought about how easily power had been mistaken for position, how loudly confidence had been confused with competence. The system didn't punish Ryan, it simply stopped protecting him. That distinction matters. When I left the building that evening, I felt no triumph, only clarity. The company had learned something it couldn't unlearn. Clients had reminded leadership where accountability actually lives. Ryan lost nothing he had truly earned. He gained time to learn, away from consequences he wasn't ready to carry. That was the justice, quiet, surgical, final. It ended without applause, which felt appropriate. Organizations rarely change because someone wins. They change because risk becomes visible and denial becomes expensive. What happened to Ryan wasn't cruelty. It was correction applied late. The board didn't destroy him. They contained him. That choice protected clients, preserved credibility, and reminded everyone watching that leadership isn't inherited, announced, or defended with slides. It is measured quietly, over time, by who remains trusted when pressure arrives. I walked away knowing the lesson would outlast all of us. Nothing about it felt loud, but everything about it felt permanent, deliberate, and deserved in the way mature systems enforce accountability quietly. I never went back to that office. They offered. They always do. A quiet suggestion, a calendar invite, a comment about how the light was better in the corner suite. I declined every time, without explanation. After everything that happened, returning would have felt unnecessary. The office had never been the source of my authority. It had only been a place where other people watched me work. What mattered moved with me, and it always had. I work differently now, independently. I choose my projects, and I choose the people involved in them. I take on problems that deserve precision, not noise. I sit in rooms where decisions are made carefully, not hurried, and where accountability is treated as something real, not performative. There is a calm that comes with that kind of control, not dominance, not revenge, just clarity. I say yes when it makes sense. I say no when it doesn't. And when I leave, nothing breaks. Sometimes I pass the building on my way to meetings. The lights are still on. The logo hasn't changed. Inside, the systems continue doing what systems do, correcting quietly. Remembering what works, Ryan remains employed, busy with internal initiatives that never reach clients. I don't think about him much. Correction doesn't require resentment. What stays with me is the lesson the company learned. Trust can't be transferred with keys or inherited with titles. It can't be rushed, and it can't be replaced once broken. It accumulates slowly, through consistency, and it disappears instantly when treated as expendable. That freedom came with responsibility, but it was the kind I understood. No politics, no performance, no borrowed authority, just decisions, consequences, and the quiet knowledge that when something failed, it would fail honestly, in daylight, without excuses or inherited protection. It felt earned, balanced, and finally sustainable long term. I didn't reclaim a desk. I reclaimed distance, perspective, peace, the kind that comes when outcomes no longer depend on convincing anyone of your value. They gave him my office. I kept the trust. And in this business, that's the only thing that ever mattered. When I look back on what happened, the lesson isn't about winning or losing an office. It's about understanding where real value lives. I learned that titles can be handed out, rooms can be reassigned, but trust is built one quiet decision at a time, and once it exists, it moves with you. There's a strange peace in realizing you don't need to prove your worth anymore. You just live it, and the world responds. If you've stayed with me to the end, thank you. I'm curious what part of this story stayed with you the longest. And where are you listening from right now if this story felt familiar? Or if it gave you a moment of clarity? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like or a share helps these stories reach the people who might need them most. And if you want to stay for more stories like this, you're always welcome to subscribe.